Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today we're doing some more questions and answers. Sorry this one's a little bit late. They're meant to be coming out on like Wednesdays, or that's when I was hoping they'd be coming out. But obviously last week was a bit of an issue for me. However, the workers are now gone, so I thought I'd do the video now to catch up instead of like waiting a whole week. So yeah, I got a couple of questions from the most recent Q&A video. I'll jump straight in. CocoDog13 asks, what are your thoughts on the mini dungeons, considering there's quite a few and they're pretty damn cool, and that in your most recent video you're speculating about a possible new one in the next patch. How do you feel about the current ones being pretty well hidden and not giving an achievement for completion? The reason I asked this is when I recently found a mini dungeon and asked my guild if anyone wanted to come. No one even knew mini dungeons were a thing, and it's not a small guild. I love the mini dungeons, I really do. I've talked about this a few times before, about how we heard about the one in QandA Plateau during one of the betas, and it was this incredibly exciting thing to me that I felt like it was going to be in every single zone. We were going to have like one mini dungeon per zone. You know, just like how we have vistas and points of interest, it was going to be a mini dungeon per zone. And I've also talked, I believe in even one of these Q&A videos, about how I think we should have like lore manuscripts or stories that we can collect, and they're like an extra thing you can get in each zone. I think on top of that we should have a mini dungeon for every zone, and then like that would really start to flesh things out and push map completion away from being this like necessity and instead like a serious endeavor to undertake for every single map, so it doesn't feel like such a chore and it's more of a choice you make. But anyway, yeah, I love the mini dungeons that are in the game, particularly the one in QandA, so I think that's the one that really shines. Of course, we did have a second one added to the game last Halloween patch, and at the time again it looked like maybe this was just something ArenaNet were gonna slowly retrospectively trickle back into the game, but then they never really did that anymore. At the same time as that came in, there was some more Explorer achievements added, if you guys remember, as well as dynamic events. It was one of those, it was the only time they've ever done a patch where they did sort of just over a wide scale add small bits of content to the world, and they've never gone back to that, and they've explained why. It's because people didn't really like the idea too much. So, you know, it was something they tried and the community just never expressed great happiness over seeing, and I guess at that point they just decided, right, don't worry about the mini dungeons anymore. If you guys haven't played it, the one in QandA Plateau is fantastic. It's tied to the end, first of all, of a meta event chain, which adds more significance to the meta event chain in the first place. It would be nice if that had like a daily chest just from completing that meta, frankly, in the first place, because QandA Plateau is one of those zones where there's no easy daily chest to go for. See, the funny thing about the mini dungeon there is actually a daily chest at the end of it, right? If you kill the boss at the end of the mini dungeon, you will get a daily chest just like you will from completing other metas. It's just because it's a mini dungeon at the end of a meta event at the same time, it's an awful lot of effort. I think if we saw a daily chest coming from the meta event itself to gain access to the dungeon, and also a daily chest at the end of the dungeon, perhaps even one of those chests that gives you two, we'll see lots of people now enjoying and playing through that mini dungeon because it's decent rewards for the time invested. The interesting thing there though is, do ArenaNet really want to encourage the community at large to do this? If any of you have ever participated in meta event farming, like that culture, that idea that at reset you jump in game and you load up, say, one of these third-party apps where it tells you which meta events are currently going on, and you just hop around the world and complete them and kill tons of mega bosses. Well, not mega bosses, just big bosses, right? If you've ever participated in that, you'll know that around reset, there are tons of people, like especially in the more populated servers, ungodly amounts of players there all at once. And our mini dungeons, yes, they are open world content, but are they, particularly if you think about the one in QandA Plateau, is it fit for purpose when you're asking 50 people to go through there? Like, it's claustrophobic, it's small corridors, it's an aesthetic that I really enjoy. I like these smaller areas. This is one thing I feel like Guild Wars 2 has always done better than the original game. The original game like had no interiors and it was always massive open areas. Guild Wars 2 isn't scared to have these small rooms and places that you can go into, but it does become a big mess, especially if you're a Norn, and especially it's made 10 times worse if you've got like a bazillion characters running through there. So does it really work? Maybe they just don't want to incentivize people to do it at all, and therein lies the problem. Mini dungeons are cool areas of content for Guild Wars 2, but they're never meant to be designed to have hundreds of people flooding through them all at once, because they just don't work in that situation. That said, I do think that fully persistent dungeons are a great idea, and I am really looking forward to the next patch if it does include something like this. Regina, one of the community managers, did post, someone asked them on Facebook, because they added like another screenshot yesterday, asked them on Facebook, hey, is this going to be a persistent dungeon? But they'd added a poem, and she just made like a tongue-in-cheek joke about it. And, you know, that could just be a joke or whatever, and she isn't making a comment either way. But it does make me think perhaps this could be a fully persistent mini dungeon. But really, mini dungeon isn't the word for what we're seeing added into Kessex Hills. This looks like a full-on dungeon. If the interior of that tower matches even remotely how large it looks on the exterior of it, then we're talking a very large multi-layered tower. If anybody ever played Final Fantasy X-2, and in particular Final Fantasy X-2, well, okay, just Final Fantasy X-2, there was a giant dungeon with many floors that you'd be descending through Bevelle, and in the international version of the game there was another version that was more of like a strategy style game where you're climbing up a tower. It makes me think of those, you know, it could be so expansive in the hundreds of floors up and up and up and up as we go. Could be very, very cool. And if it is very large like that, then yes, it does work, because if it's large enough, you can have hundreds of people in there, and it doesn't matter, because eventually they're all going to get spread out across the floors anyway. So I am looking forward to it. I'm curious to see what their ideas are for sort of an open world style dungeon, because I do think they are largely untapped in this game, and I love the Diessa thing. I really do. I keep mentioning that. There is, of course, another one. There's one in what's the zone? In one of the Shiver Peak zones, there was one that was added at Halloween, which features a very dark room. This one does tend to get run a little bit more frequently. The last time I was in there was when we had the Zephyrite Sanctum, and we were looking for balloons, and ArenaNet added one of the balloons to the end of the mini dungeon. So that was always fun, and it was nice to go in there because there were lots of people there at the same time too. And they just feature cool puzzle-esque content and gameplay, right? There are sort of minor puzzles that you'll come across in many of the dungeons, but because we run those dungeons over and over and over again, they're never really a puzzle anymore. They're just completely trivialized by basic tactics that people learn to do, or they're like, particularly the puzzles you find in the regular dungeons of the game are designed to be completed by like multiple people at once. It's like, okay, everybody needs to stand over this little bit of tar that's spewing out of the floor to spawn the boss, and then you can't move from the tar, blah blah blah, right? They're designed for many people. The open world dungeons, the puzzles in there, they're a little bit more designed just to be completed by perhaps even one player, right? The Diessa one has a really cool concept where you have to take a sword. You have to first complete a puzzle to get a sword right at the start, and then you have to carry this sword right the way basically to the end of the dungeon to get through the final gate. And it's a complete dick move if you never found out where that sword is, because it's hidden at the start, and you can go all the way through the dungeon and then find, oh, I need this sword, and you can't get any further. And it's kind of annoying, but on replay, it's actually this really nice idea, and I really enjoyed that about that dungeon. You don't see that elsewhere in the game. Will the tower in Kessex Hills tap into this? I don't know. We can't say for sure, but I would be very excited to see this as a persistent dungeon of any sort. And more mini dungeons, you know, this is one of those things. It's like if they add an expansion, I want to see every single zone have like a mini dungeon. Come on, let's just make it a staple. I don't like things to be cardboard and ArenaNet to follow patterns too much when it comes to the story, but you know, there are basic features that they can easily just litter about like this, and mini dungeons in each zone. Yeah, that'd be very cool. Of course, the living story's been okay for adding stuff like that too. Think about like the Aetherblade hideout just in Gendaran Fields. It's sort of the same kind of thing, but it's more jumping puzzly than anything else, and I'd like to see a return to that kind of content that with less focus on the platforming, more focus on bosses in there and puzzles in there and unique environments. A slightly more personal one, which I'll just shoot through. QandA Youngster says, why did you name your main Liss instead of WP? Well, Wooden Potatoes as a character name never really occurred to me at all. I have bagged the name, but only on an alternate account, and so that people like wouldn't imposter me if that was ever going to happen. I don't know whether anyone ever tried. That was the only, like, Wooden Potatoes as a character name just wasn't something that interested me. Like, I knew YouTube was going to be a big part of me playing the game, but also, first and foremost, I just wanted to play it as a fan. My original main was actually a Mesmer that was named after my Mesmer main for the first game. However, I sort of realised very early on that I didn't enjoy Mesmer that much in Guild Wars 2, and I had a phenomenal time playing my Elementalist during the betas, so I made a new main a few days in. I made a new name, and I named it Liss, which is named after actually one of there's two different references in Guild Wars 2 about the goddess Lissa that you can find in all. One is at her temple, and I believe there's a reference in the personal story too. One's at her temple though, and one is in a scripture written in a camp in the Cursed Shore. And both of these mention that Lissa is not one god, but she is two gods, two entities that make up a single one, and both of them name these individual entities. Okay, so at the big Lissa temple, you can see one of them is the seal of Issa, and one of them is the seal of Lys, spelt Lyss, right? But at the same time, to make it even more confusing, at this camp, which references there are two separate entities that make up Lissa, it names those two entities as different things. It names them as Lys, spelt instead just Lys, only one S instead of twos, and the other one as Ilya, Ilya. So there's all these crossed up wires and cool ideas with that goddess and how people vaguely understand that she's a god, but no, she's one god made out of two, but no, actually we don't even really know the names of the two entities that make up her. It's really cool. I've always been a big fan, owing to the fact that my main in Guild Wars 1 was a Mesmer. I've always been a big fan of Lissa. I think she's a really unique god, and this was a bit of a mind blow for me when Guild Wars 2 first came out, that there was this cool story about that, and I named Lys, my elementalist, after one of these entities, Lys. I actually have a second female Asura on my account now. They're meant to be sisters, and the other one is named Issa, so like I've bagged both of the two names of this goddess, and that's where the name comes from. And yeah, it's like I say, it just never really occurred to me to name it Wooden Potatoes. YouTube was a big thing for me, but playing the game was a bigger thing, which maybe wasn't a good idea or a good priority, but hey, there you go. Dasanayad says, why... I'm sorry, I've butchered your name there. Dansaynad, I think is how you say it. Why do Crate have a belly button? Interesting idea. Probably an oversight, okay? You can't really ask for a serious... The reason why this is a question, guys, is because this the crate are laid in eggs and hatcheries. Why would things laid from eggs have belly buttons? They don't, do they? There's not like an umbilical cord within the egg that connects to the body. It just doesn't happen, right? So, yeah, it's a weird thing. It was probably just an oversight. I mean, they're kind of humanoid-ish creatures, and the guy that did the art for it wasn't paying that much attention to lore. And we kind of need to move on. There was something someone else was saying the other day about some really trivial thing in Guild Wars 2, and asking it sort of as a question, has anybody noticed that this isn't the same as this? And to me, whenever that comes up and it's clearly just an oversight, we kind of have to let it go. People aren't genuinely looking for the answer, I feel like, most of the time. They're just looking for recognition that they'd noticed this thing, and it's a gotcha moment. It says, I caught you out, and I don't really care too much for that. I think it's probably an oversight. I wouldn't look too close into it, but hey, maybe the new patch will tell us. We will see. Dida01 says, just wondering if you noticed that there are now two types of gargoyles, the old with wings and the new without. Looks like in the patch of last night was a bit more than trick-or-treat bags in the final chest of the clock tower. Well, you know, there's a bit of depressing news on this. There was a great live stream on 2 days ago. Splendid. It was fantastic. I loved it. In which three of the prominent... Guild Wars 1 designers, I believe, like the live team for Guild Wars 1. So we had John Stummy and two other guys that were there that seem to have been responsible for most of the coding for many of the updates that went into Guild Wars 1 in its later days. In fact, I know John Stummy was. But they were talking a lot about Halloween. And these guys, actually, like, you'd think, they're just coders, people that just sort of put the quest in the game. They get told what the quest is, and then they just sort of code it through. But these guys actually had an incredible understanding of the Halloween lore. And as far as I could make out from watching that great live stream, they're sort of responsible for writing a lot of the Halloween lore, and it's sort of just fun ideas that they come up with. They were talking about so many cool little things about how they came up with, like, Gumdrops the Invisible Pony and stupid jokes that we never saw. You know, their sense of humor was right up my alley. It was really, really cool live stream. They talked about how there were certain characters that if you did specific emotes to in Guild Wars 1, they would actually respond, right? And this is mind-blowing to me. I went through, like, every piece of trivia that I possibly could that existed about that game as I did my, like, playthrough of it, just to impart that on other people in the videos, and I never came across anything like that. I love that there are secret little things like that, like, really, emotes that you can play to NPCs in Guild Wars 1 and they would respond to it. Like, phenomenal stuff, really cool. Great live stream overall, and they seem to have a really good grasp of what the story of Halloween was and where it was going generally. However, they were asked about the gargoyles and why the gargoyles have appeared in Halloween content. And they just all looked dumbfounded. There was like a good 10 seconds where they were like, what? I don't... Hey, who? Huh? And the basic response after that was, oh, they were just basically, they were just an enemy that we added to Halloween because they seemed to fit, right? And like, that's kind of painful to hear that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, man, sometimes they really don't have any direction. And yeah, it hadn't even occurred to them. Like, it's okay if they, you know, if they were well aware that the community were excited about this prospect of the gargoyles and that there is a mystery and that maybe there was some cool story behind why they'd appeared in Halloween. As long as they were even aware that the community knew about this and was frothing at the mouths about this, that when they get this question in the live stream, they say, well, look, you know, we know a lot of you are excited, but honestly, when we added it in there in the first place, it was just something that we added, you know. Oh, well, we're sorry. There's not much more to it. Whatever there is to it is what you place on it. But you know, that would have been fine. It would have been annoying, but fine. But no, the sheer dumbfoundedness, the absolute blank faces that came when this question was asked them was really kind of depressing to see, to be honest. They did have another little talk on that live stream at the same. So I guess my answer to your question here is, have I noticed that there are two different types of gargoyles? Who cares? What does it matter? It doesn't sound like the gargoyles have got to do with anything. So, there you go. It was probably as basic as, oh, we've got to fill the world with creatures in Guild Wars 2. Okay, we've done that. Oh, what creatures didn't make the cut? Oh, gargoyles. All right, we'll make one tiny little NPC. The Char talks about it in the Black Citadel. Done. Way later, totally separate event for Halloween. Completely different people at the company are like, all right, what should we have coming out of these doors? Oh, what about these gargoyle things? All right, we'll slap them in there. No communication between them at any time, and that's it. That's the end of the story. That is how I now view that the gargoyle thing happened, probably. So, yeah, that's kind of my answer to the question. Another interesting thing, though, on this topic, they did talk about on that live stream, was this idea of mysteries that are put in the game. There is a mystery that was established in Halloween of Guild Wars 1 where a nameless lich, a character called the Nameless Lich, this woman wearing Halloween armor just randomly appeared in Drocknell's Forge one year. And she just stood there, and there was never an answer to what she was doing. I think the devs even suggested that she was going to be a part of something greater, but like on the forums or whatever, but nothing ever happened of it. And they actually mentioned, and I'd long since given up on that idea of that being a mystery. And it's not really enough to do a full Guild Wars 2 mystery on, just for the record, because it is only one NPC that was added somewhere. But the devs did talk about this, and they mentioned how they remembered this. But in conjunction with this mystery, they sort of talked about how sometimes stuff is put in the game, the community come up with better ideas, ArenaNet fully accept the community come up with better ideas than maybe they even originally had for this idea. And they sort of get left in a bit of a rut, and they're like, okay, well, do we do our original idea and then disappoint everyone, or do we forever leave it hanging? And at least for this small team, and don't forget, you can never take the words of one dev as like a gospel from the entire company or the entire company's philosophy. That's just crazy. But in this particular situation, they talked about how, look, that they would sort of rather just never put the answer in, because then that personal theory, that personal meaning that someone attributed to it forever remains valid in a small way. Which, I can understand how they come to that conclusion, but that also, frankly, depresses me a bit, because once you know that there are these mysteries that put in the game, and then they have no intention of going back to, that maybe they didn't even have a solid idea in the first place of what it was meant to be, they didn't have, like, the creativity in the first place to put that compelling mystery in there with a satisfying conclusion. Once you know that, especially that it's never going to be resolved, the community very quickly becomes jaded and feels like there's no point thinking about it in the first place. Sometimes you have to let the people down. Preferably you don't let them down at all, and you just devise something that is really interesting to a lot of people, and maybe you throw in some red herrings there, and it's different to what the community thought it was going to be, but in a good way. And I appreciate that's difficult to do, but I really think you should focus on trying to resolve that stuff instead of just leaving it there because, you know, of whatever personal idea someone comes up with. Ideas mean nothing. People don't like that they have ideas that are never resolved. They like to see a resolution. I personally, anyway, even if the resolution is not what I want it to be, look at the Scarlet thing, look at this crazy theory we managed to come up with about the Battle of Divinity's Reach. Great idea, and then the resolution didn't match it. I'm happy, though, that they gave us... What if they just left it? What if Scarlet never became a thing? What if that mysterious stranger... And they just left it because they're like, oh, man, oh, my God, we didn't have that story written out. Everyone's going to want that, and they're going to be disappointed. We'll just leave it. Like, no, that would have been 10 times worse. I'm glad that they at least pushed forward what little they had, and we had a conclusion, right? If it's always open doors and open answers everywhere, people stop asking the questions and people stop wondering in the first place. So that's kind of my view on it. And I guess it was nice because, you know, this is something I think a lot of people in the community have sort of suspected. It's something that the devs have sometimes gone by. Oh, we've got the Wizard's Tower at the moment. People have got all these cool ideas about Verata and so forth that they never thought of themselves. Does that mean that they're not going to incorporate into their own ideas? Just because the community's thought of it, feel free, pilfer it. The community want you to pilfer it. Like, there's no... Please, take the ideas of the community. And in fact, again, I think John Stummy even mentioned that as an idea too. You know, it's nice to take the ideas of the community. There is no shame in that whatsoever. If the community comes up with something that they get enthused about themselves, then take it. Please take it, because that's what they want to see most, and they don't care if it's exactly what they expected. They're not looking to be surprised at that point. They're looking to be affirmed. That's my opinion anyway. Right, lastly, last little question. I know we've gone on for a while. Will we ever see the underworld return? Probably not. I've said this before. It's because it's more of a human-centric type thing. Though, as time goes by, I think ArenaNet is starting to shed that idea that that's really important. Who cares if it's a human-centric thing? No one could come in anyway. You know, it's so arbitrary to find small reasons for the Silvarian, Norn, Char to come in. And you don't even need reasons for the races themselves to care. You just need reasons for the player character to want to do it. And most of the time, that motivation is going to come by the fact, hey, it's new content. So it doesn't really matter. And I think we may eventually see this kind of content come in. The other God realms too, the Fissure of Woe, Dwayna's like Paradise area, Lyssa's crazy area that they once talked about too. These could eventually be added. The reason why I picked this question though is because I feel like the God Realms, as well as stuff like, you know, like this theory that I put forward in one of my videos where I said, basically, we've got this cool lore about the Crate, about how they have these prophets that could summon an army down, and maybe we're actually seeing that come forward as a living story. We've just been talking about the gargoyles. Let's say that there is a real story behind them. You know, all these minor mysteries and interesting directions that sort of lie completely out of the scope of the Elder Dragon fight, and the God Realms included. These stories, I think, are what would be perfect for the living world to tackle, right? Like, they've totally given us Scarlet and something completely new, but the way I'd like it is if we have chapters. We have, like, okay, we have a chapter in which these 4 months, these, you know, these 8 updates worth of content are all around one of these mini stories that has already been established in lore. So we spend a long time looking at the Crate, and it is specifically about this story of the prophets coming down. That works well for living story. I think that would be the perfect way that they could do it. Now that I really think about it, these stories that have already been established, maybe even stuff as far as Magday and Sahothin, you know, conclusion to those stories, this is what would be really, really good. Instead of adding new stuff, you know, about the Molten Alliance and Scarlet that people are going to immediately judge and be like, oh, I don't like this villain isn't very compelling, blah blah blah. If you see it in existing stuff that people already want conclusions to, you can't go wrong. Despite me saying this, and why I would therefore be excited to see this be a conclusion to that lore we have about the Crates and the Crate and their obelisks and their prophets coming back from another dimension. Despite all that, the evidence is mounting that this is probably just something related to the Nightmare Core and Scarlet because of the thorns and all of the other rubbish we're seeing going on there. So, you know, we might not see it at all, but that's sort of my thoughts on it. There you go, guys. That's today's questions and answers. Thank you very much for watching. Again, I apologise that it was not out on Wednesday, but it was out of my hands. I will see you next Wednesday, though. No worries about that. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Hope to see you next time, everyone. Have a good one.